or bully you. Kaya na for all of we, let's live it.
Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. My name is Christopher Ram. Thank you for joining us, me and my guests, over the next hour as we discuss topical issues. You notice on the screen is the minimum wage and the cost of living. Just before I introduce my guests, I'd like to point out that the mask mandate has now been removed. Although in respect of public space and so on, there's still a suggestion that perhaps one should exercise a little bit of caution, and I think that's exactly what's happening with me and my guests this evening. I want to apologize for the late start for viewers on Channel 9. This is because of the cumulative effect of all the programs that have preceded it for the evening. I still hope, however, that you will find this evening's discussion particularly relevant. This, in fact, is what we call bread and butter issues. The issue of the minimum wage and the cost of living. With me this evening is my colleague from Article 13, Dr. Yogan Adio, who has been one of the leading lights on the work being done by Article 13 as part of civil society. And I have my friend as well, Mr. Norris Witter, a unionist, perhaps one of the more serious independent trade unionists operating in Guyana at the moment. We know not too long ago he had a very successful led a very successful wage negotiation with Sol, and I think the minimum wage, the lowest wage was what? $130,000 per month. Now we'll probably put that into context this evening, and I should mention that despite all efforts at advocating for something more meaningful and more realistic, the private sector minimum wage still remains at about $44,800.
$4,200.
Sorry, thank you very much. If we were to take this against the rising prices of commodity, we realize not only the absurdity but the almost inhumanity of having a wage of just over 200 US. I was speaking with someone today and he was saying that in St. Kitts you can't pay less than 1,000 US, the equivalent of $1,000 US. That's about 2,800 EC dollars. You know, so we have a crisis in Guyana in terms of wages. But I'll let our friends talk about it. The history of this minimum wage, Norris, you've been following it. You know of all the efforts that were made to get to a figure that is more meaningful and more relevant. What's the problem?
First of all, Chris, Let me thank you for having me once again on your program, and also, secondly, to extend greetings to our viewing public. I want to preface what I have to say by making this statement, and I think it is in sync with your opening remarks. I, Norris Witter, is not a member of any political party. My union is not affiliated to or friendly to any political party. When I speak, or when the union speaks, it speaks for and on behalf of its membership, which membership comprises of portions of all political affiliation, religious persuasion, and racial ethnic extraction. That is who we are. We are not beholden to any political party. No political party directs us, or no political party tells us what to do or what not to do. Our interest is for and on behalf of our membership. You know, I think it was Bob Marley who said that whenever you ask the politicians a favor, they want to control you forever. Well, the General Workers Union and I, as a servant of that body, has never asked and will never ask any politician for any favor, because we don't want to be controlled now or forever.
Let me, thanks for saying that. But is there any indirect affiliation? We know that in the labor movement, there are two major groupings. You have the TUC and you have FITUG. FITUG comprises persons very supportive of the government. The TUC currently is led by a member of parliament of the APNU, AFC. So, are you saying that these two groupings are of which you are one, are not politically inclined?
The historical facts suggest clearly that from time immemorial, the Guyana Agricultural and General Workers Union has always fielded one of its senior officials as a member of parliament on behalf of the People's Progressive Party. I don't want to go too far back, but you had Brother Komal Chan, who was then the president of the Guyana Agricultural and General Workers Union, who served as a member of parliament on behalf of the PPP for in excess of 2 decades. Currently, the president who was succeeded Brother Komal Chand, Brother C. Paul Narain, currently serves as a member of parliament for and on behalf of the People's Progressive Party. Within recent times, we have seen where, while the president of the TUC was not nominated to be a member of parliament, the current president of the TUC, Sister Coretta MacDonald, serves as a member of parliament for and on behalf of APNU. But what I know for a fact is that our serving as a member of parliament was not promoted by the Guyana Trades Union Congress. Now, the point I want to make is this, is that the relationship between the political parties and representatives of whichever union it is, whether it's GAU or the president of the TUC or the general secretary of the GTU, is never one of what we may say that equal partners. These individuals are always considered to be junior partners to the political establishment. Right? And therefore, what it redounds to is a subordination of the workers' interests. Where these operatives are concerned, these union members who are serving in parliament on behalf of these political parties, subordinating the workers' interests in preference to the interests and the diktat of the political directorate.
Let me bring in our other guests, Dr. Mahadeo. Do you think these two broad groupings, TUC and FITO, act independently of political parties?
Short answer is no. They are not independent. In fact, the genesis of FITO would have been because of the general perception that the TUC historically has been taking one side in politics in this country. What also has happened was that we have, I'm not going to use such diplomatic language as my brother Norris did. I'm going to just be as plain as ever, Chris. All through Guyana's history, we have had cases where the Trade Union Congress, trade union leaders of various unions have become directly affiliated and associated with political parties, and they are rewarded by giving them a seat in the National Assembly many times. Undoubtedly, workers suffer because of the lack of independence of the trade union movement. And I'll add one last thing to this. The fact that there has been political marriage, or there has been a marriage between political parties and the trade union, the unions across the board, has led to greater or lesser enhancement of workers' rights, greater suffering. Case in point, we now have a history where governments decide what wage increase must be awarded to workers rather than it be a part of negotiation, be a part of the collective labor agreement. Everybody, the union plus government, has been throwing away collective labor agreements in the basket because by virtue of the fact government has awarded, unions become quiet and accept.
I want to add a further question to this. Do you believe the arrangement where you have now in the National Assembly representatives from the political groupings in government and the opposition, that has in any way assisted the workers of this country?
No. My belief is that it has not assisted the workers in this country in many ways. Chris, pardon me for saying this, but during the election impasse of 2020, I remember publicly accusing members of APNU AFC for double dipping. There were certain persons who were serving in various places, double and triple dipping, and they were getting 2 and 3 salaries. For me, it's the taxpayers that fund the salaries of those in the National Assembly. It's the workers' union dues that pay the executives their salaries. I believe at some stage, I want to call out men and women of this country who wants to take leadership position and ask them, where is integrity? If you want to represent the workers, represent the workers. You can't be in marriage where it's an abusive relationship and yet you're representing the abused person.
Norris, I'll put the same question to you, and in this context, particularly in relation to what we're looking at on the screen, the minimum wage and the cost of living. Do you think the unionists in the National Assembly, on the government side or on the opposition side, have really represented the worker or the workers of this country in relation to the minimum wage and the cost of living?
Okay, Chris, let me put this in your question in context. In 2019, the tripartite committee that comprises of representatives from labor, the employers' organization, and the government met, and after months of scientific analysis, came to the position that a minimum wage of $44,200 was reasonable. That is what in 2019 I'm talking about, right? All that was required was for that recommendation from the tripartite committee to be taken to Parliament, to Cabinet, have Cabinet's approval, and thereafter for the minister responsible for labor to sign an order to give effect to that payment. We are in 2022. Do you know that in April 2021, FETOC is on record of calling upon the minister, demanding of the minister, because there's a change of government, the new minister, Mr. Joseph Hamilton, right, supported the tripartite committee's position in 2019, that is for the minimum wage to be increased from $44,200, right? He is on record as saying that he will take to Cabinet the recommendation for the increase from $44,200. He came back to the tripartite committee meeting later that year, it was around November, and reported that he has presented the recommendation to the Cabinet. Cabinet has approved the recommendation, but all that is required now is for the order to be signed. But he was awaiting some other round of consultation with a section of the private sector commission that was not comfortable, not with the increase of the minimum wage from $44,200 to $60,000, but they were not comfortable with effective date of implementation. We talked about November last year, November 2021. We are now in 2022. I am seeing once again where FETOC has renewed its call for the implementation, or for the minister to sign the order to implement the new national minimum wage of $60,000.
You didn't quite answer my question, though. My question was whether these union persons in the National Assembly, on the government side, on the opposition side, have served the workers in relation to the minimum wage and the cost of living.
My answer is no, because
Good.
since this debate has been raging in relation to the minister signing the order to give effect to the 60,000, I have not heard a word from these labor unions in Parliament vigorously representing this cause. I've not heard it. And this is most disappointing. You understand? And may I say this, that the $60,000 that was approved of.
We'll get there.
Okay.
I know what you're going to say. You? What's,
Chris, yeah, go on.
your view on this, the role of these so-called trade unionists in the political arena of the National Assembly. Whose interests are they serving? A political interest or a union interest?
It has been definitively, in my view, a political interest. We have had heads of large unions, trade unions in Guyana, sitting and taking sides of government against workers' interests. Use Gaisuku as a prime example, right? Whereas, there would have been an independent report, there would have been a commission about the closure of Gaisuku, about doing what they did. Yet, when APNO AFC took that decision in Parliament, where was the union representative and where was the union representative voice? Was it because Gaisuku was largely seen to be pro-PPP, so a pro-AFC union cannot say anything? Similarly, when the wage increase of 7% was given last year, is it because most people affected, well, even the GPSU was soundly asleep, so nobody else could speak for them. But the truth is that whatever is being done for workers, the trade union heads that sit and lie in the same bed as their political masters you can only serve one master at a time, and obviously the political sway holds firm.
Norris, I want you to continue what you were about to say about that 60,000 dollars.
Yes.
I think I had a pretty good idea what you were going to say. Let me see if I'm right.
The $60,000 that was agreed to in 2019 was based on the prevailing cost of living at that time. $60,000, even if it were to be implemented now, will not suffice. The national minimum wage, and Chris, I must commend you for a wonderful job that you have done in terms of, I have a spreadsheet here before me, captured around the cream monthly grocery basket. Family of 2 adults and 3 children, age 15, 10 and 6, all in school. What this basket, this monthly grocery basket is saying, right?
I think I have a copy.
Yes. That for a family of 3, it will require a minimum wage of $117,340. Let me say this to you. I consider this monthly grocery basket of 5 to be very, very modest, because I've looked at some of the prices here. For instance,
You're paying more than
the moderator has quoted the price of chicken at $4.40 per pound. Chicken is over $600 per pound. Cooking gas has moved from $460 to over $560.
And cooking gas is not included in this.
It's not included here. $4,600 to $5,600 plus thing. Flour, well, you all know the thing, 15%, right? And once flour moves to 15%, all the products that are made from flour will also increase. So I consider this, the figures quoted here, to be very, very, very modest. You understand? So when one look at the 60,000 in relation to what we have before us here, right? As a monthly basket, it is like cheese to chop. So,
Norris, if I may, Chris, if I may, I want to take a step back. The discussion, for example, of Minister Joe Hamilton's petitioning cabinet coming out of the tripartite agreement recommendation. Look, is there a repository?
You said Hamilton petitioning cabinet. Whose cabinet?
The government of
his own cabinet?
Correct.
Now, isn't that a case, if he was genuinely interested in workers' welfare, isn't that an issue that he should say, look, this is a red line for me,
Agree.
being a Minister of Labour?
Definitely.
But Chris, there is a bigger problem, you know. Look, you are yourself a private investor in Guyana. I have also been dabbling in business in Guyana. And there is not an employee that has been associated with a company that I'm associated with that earns or has earned less than $70,000 for the past 3 years.
Yes.
There are many private sector organizations that have been paying way above what is deemed the minimum private sector wage in Guyana. So firstly, is there a study that has been done to see what some of the private sector bodies are paying versus what the rest are paying? What is the median? Additionally, when we look at the government giving a public sector wage increase and making the tax threshold match almost that wage increase so that they can get, the truth is, Chris, the other problem that comes up now is companies like yours and mine, all through COVID, there was no work being done, but we paid every employee salaries, paid their taxes, paid employers contribution, everything, because we cared for the employees.
Let's give the PPP government credit for this as well. The PPP did that. No government employee lost income during the COVID.
Correct. But the point I want to make though is that we have to have a good, a fair study of private sector wage increase, because ultimately we started by talking about Sol giving 130,000. The truth is Sol's products are above what is the median in the fuel market. So ultimately is the consumer that will
Always.
be paying. So it cannot be taken or treated in a vacuum, and I would have expected Ministry of Labor and the trade union movement to start to get studies done that assess all of these things and be proactive about it.
I agree. In fact, I think, and this reflects badly on the trade union movement. I think if the Ministry of Labor does not want or feels either idealess or courageless to publish information on increases on the various union agreements, then the TUC should publish that kind of information. In other words, it should not have taken a photo opportunity, whether for you or for Sol, for us to know about that agreement you signed. The Minister of Labor needs to start making reports to the National Assembly. So do all other ministers. We have such a backward culture when we talk about information. It's almost as though the people of this country don't have a right to know anything, despite the fact that we have an Access to Information Act. Why don't we have? Why does the TUC publish information on salary increases? And I'm not running away from the point that Yog is making. I think one of the things, the reason, if I may say so, and since this is not commercial for doing this, the purpose of this is partly when Raman McRae was doing Budget Focus, a couple of people asked us, do you have a cost of living? And I thought, you know what, we did this many years past, why don't we resume it? So what this is going to do is the same place that we have. I accept your criticism, Norris, that some of these prices are conservative. We took the position we rather err on the conservative side than err on the extravagant side. People say, oh, you're inflating figures. This will be done at the same location on the same day of every month. so that you get to see a time movement. So, and we have shared this. I've shared this. Raman Mukherjee has shared it, and when we have the first increase, we will publish it. Hopefully, prices will have gone down. We know the chicken you don't even get them in the street, in the market now. You go to the supermarkets and you see that section empty. The question is, what do we do with this type of information? You have some economists who will tell you, but oh God, you can't go increasing salaries so much. Oh, but you can keep people, workers and their family exposed to a level of nutrition that is below what everybody else advises is necessary. And you know, Yogi, you're probably a bit too young to know this. In that, it was the 1999 or that wage agreement with Chedi Jagan. Remember, it's no, sorry, it's
No, 1999 was with Janet.
Yes.
The
The one
Armstrong
was- the nine-
Tribunal. That was 1999.
Yeah.
After the public,
Yeah,
7
yes.
days public service strike.
Now, the same thing was being said. Oh, if you, that's when we had the 26% increase.
Yes.
It was being said, oh, if you have that kind of increase, what's going to do with inflation? Well, it didn't. It led to a growth in economy. And so my question now is, what do we do with this type of starvation wage that we have when you have per capita, the highest in terms of petroleum reserves, or among the highest, the top three, I would say. You have the fastest growing economy. What is disgraceful, I thought, is this budget did not increase the minimum wage for the public sector as well. Because I think we have to distinguish. There is a public sector minimum wage, there's a private sector minimum wage. I don't know what's the logic for that. If that is to reflect cost of living and the balanced diet and so on, then we should have a national minimum wage.
Chris, that's a single point. The public sector minimum wage currently stands at $74,900. But the point that needs to be made is this: that the public sector minimum wage, where it stands currently, was as a consequence of imposition by both previous, former and current governments. Do you know that since the 1999 arbitration award to the PSU, which arose out of the 57-day strike, there has not been a settled increase to the public service workers through the collective bargaining process?
Isn't that an indictment of the trade union movement and the politicians?
It surely is, because it is a violation of the Constitution, it's a violation of ILO Convention, it's a violation of the CARICOM Charter of Civil Society, it's a violation of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. Right? It is also a violation of the agreement between the Public Service Union and the government of Guyana. But you will rightly ask the question then, why are these violations allowed to be continued? Right? And it will be a fair question. What is required? You know, if one scrutinizes the recent dailies and even social media, you will see where the rice farmers in Essequibo, in Blackbush Polo, the taxi drivers and the minibus drivers at Criverton, they have taken to the streets in protest against rising prices. The unions and the membership must understand that that their condition will not change unless they are prepared to struggle.
But
Yeah, but Chris, if I may, so there are two things I see that I want to inject. One is that there has been historical talks about public sector reform. The truth is that sections of the population, all they are a voting bloc. And so public sector will never, you go into GP, post office, you go into any one of these places and you would wait for somebody to even deign to look at you for a minute to give you some attention, and you're paying their wages. There needs to be reform, and I would think that the trade union movements themselves must realize that the fact that you're carrying levels of staff is not good for everybody else. If you're carrying too much, it waters down everybody. I agree there needs to be an overall look at employment itself. But the other thing that I wanted to quickly raise, Chris, in Barbados, 1 day ago, Prime Minister Motley announced a reduction in fuel prices from $4.13 at the pump to $3.99 with immediate effect. You ain't hear nobody crying about old fuel, old stock and new stock. Prime Minister made a statement, reduce because the people in the country were feeling it. In Guyana, we have had cases. Kudos to the current government. They reduced the excise tax twice, right?
yes,
But my point I want to suggest, aren't we having people who are looking what's happening and anticipating what impact certain things are going to happen? And if oil prices go there, this is what we need to do. And if this happened, we have wealth. As you said, we're probably one of the, on paper, we're the wealthiest nation probably on earth at this moment in terms of growth. Where is the intellectual capital and why is it not shining?
is it subservient to the political capital, Norris?
Well, the politicians, the political directorate, are the managers of the political economy. One must recognize that. And there's an assumption that within the political directorate is the embodiment of all the intellectual capital, right, that is necessary to address all the challenges within the economy. As a matter of fact, the way the political directorate sometimes behave, it is as though they have a monopoly of knowledge, and therefore everyone else is shut out of the decision-making process.
Well, that's so contradictory to what Article 13 of the Constitution.
Definitely.
I notice
Yes.
Yogi Mahdi is wearing a shirt that's marked Article 13.
Well, it is for that very reason that Article 13 exists today.
So, but we have to accept that it's extremely unfortunate. Civil society in this country is really worthless almost. Look, this month, International Women's Day, I could not get a group of women to be my guests, even by remote method. I could not get one of the persons who were prominent in that exchange with the government about whether the government was moving too fast, too slow, whether it was accountable. Twice stepped out of a commitment to come and plain talk. This sad reality is that, and we talked about Ralph Ramkaran last week. He was telling us how we should deal with
Yes.
civil society. The truth is, we had a stronger civil society when we had far less democracy. Maybe someone will say, well, you got a strong democracy, you don't need a civil society. But that's exactly why you need a civil society. because civil society is there to hold the government accountable.
Correct.
And especially when you have an opposition that is struggling to find its footing. The leader of the biggest political party in the opposition is not in the National Assembly, is not the leader of the opposition. Something is wrong with our political culture.
And it shows, it translates into the pay packets of the workers. I mean, the truth is that we all, well, not we all, a lot of persons have become very subservient to the political view. And so somehow or the other, as Guyanese, we feel because it's our party in power, we gotta swallow it, we gotta take it. And you end up taking it, you end up taking the horrible cost of living, you end up taking the bad contracting jobs being served out, you end up taking everything. Just for what? Who suffers? At the end of the day, the politicians, I say this very openly, and I've said it on social media, they don't have to join a line. They put on their fancy blue and red lights and they go blazing through everything. They don't suffer what you and I have to suffer. And okay, they're members of the National Assembly, but they are very, very quickly, soon as they swear in, they carve themselves out as an elitist class, of which and for which the lowest wage earner has no hope of touching. All that worker is a vote. And unfortunately, Chris, I know I'm stretching this out, but unfortunately, the last elections have shown us that the political expediencies can translate to us throwing away that vote as well. So come back to your thing about democracy. Guyanese have to realize democracy is very fragile. And democracy does not sit well with political bedfellows or allowing ourselves to be quiet when trampling of our constitution takes place. But to come back to your wage, low wage, there needs to be, from the trade union movements, from all of the bodies, an immediate assessment and ongoing assessment of how workers fare in this country, regardless of who is in power.
So how do we get our trade unions? Because surely, of course, the government has a primary responsibility that the welfare of its people must become critical, must become primary. That no longer seems to be the case. What was the case? So we must boast with this growth and that growth, and now what we open. We don't bother with social capital, we bother with physical capital. We don't bother with social infrastructure, we bother with physical infrastructure.
Well,
how do we get this moving,
Look,
Mr.
Chris,
Witter?
I tell you what. One of the problems we have in Guyana is that we vote in politicians to office. And having voted them into office, we leave them to their own devices, hoping that they will do the best for us. Likewise, within the trade movement, we vote in trade union leaders. And having voted them in, the members leave them to their own devices, hoping that they will do the best for them.
Well,
What I'm saying is this, is that no longer should the citizenry of any country leave the politicians to their own devices.
or the trade unionists.
Or the membership of trade unions leave the leaders to their own devices.
But tell me something. Maybe you should talk, you want to come in on that point, and then I'll raise an issue.
Well, yes and no, Chris. Look, very quickly, let me say this. The truth is that this country has made one good stride. It doesn't have a lifetime president, right? Executive president of the country. 2 terms, and that's it. However, that doesn't prevail in the trade union movement. You have people who are there for life, whether they serve as general secretaries or president. My point is, and with due respect to our friend Norris here, my point is, regardless of who sits in whatever position in government and in the National Assembly, trade union movement owe it to their workers who are paying. Chris, minimum wage is there. People are suffering, but they're still forking out the union dues. Right? And they owe it to the workers to do more than just sleep. I'm sorry.
Well, you know, now let's talk about us voting the leaders of the union, the members voting the leaders. But when you look at some of the elections that are taking place in some of the bigger unions, there's no real democracy. They almost an abuse of power, where those persons make their trade union thing as though it's their pension. How can you get, and we don't want to go knocking trade unionists, we got our friend here.
But Chris,
But
can I ask this? As an accountant, I've grown up learning that you have to, when you audit somebody's books, when you issue your audit report, part of it is to disclose top salaries. One of the things that is needed and needed very quickly in this country is for all the executives of trade union movements to have a public disclosure of their earnings. And very quickly, you will see workers react. Because that's why the cushy jobs in politics and union and everything, very quickly they forget that it's the workers down there
Yeah.
that are funding it.
That's an
I-
excellent point.
A very good point. Because, and let me make this point, with you have made the point. Because when you look at the minimum wage in relation to the salary of a junior minister, it is about, the junior minister's salary is about 20 times, more than 20 times the minimum wage, right? And I shudder to wonder whether in some trade unions it may not be the same.
You mean more?
Because in my view, I think it will be ridiculous for any trade union leader to be earning more than 5 times the lowest paid employee within that union.
Well,
Ridiculous.
Maybe that's something that we need to do. That's the kind of discussion we need to have. But Yoge's point, what will trigger the action or trigger the awareness is if that information was available.
Absolutely.
It's not available now. I'm not sure I agree with your number. A junior minister, you said it's about 20 times. If you take the minimum wage even in the private sector, 20 times would take you over 800,000. I'm not sure it's that high, but it's no question high. And if you were to add the perks that go with
Total
it,
remuneration, yeah.
the drivers, because they get they get money for the drivers.
Two
they-
drivers.
Two drivers. We're not sure that they pay for the two drivers. They pay out all the money. Some they get security. They get all kinds of perks. So, but maybe the figure of 20,000 because we want to keep it with. Make sure that we don't misrepresent anything.
No,
Chris,
prior to the-
hold on a second. But Chris, the point is that Guyanese, our grassroots, we need to understand and understand fully how cushy these jobs are, you know. Why is it that the politicians and unionists and so forth fight so hard and do everything to get that job? Is it because they could do well in that job, or is it because of what they're getting out of it? Because total remuneration, you go to the UK, people are not just taxed on their salaries, they're taxed on total earning.
Yeah.
Remuneration comes in. So they bulk up all the allowances you get. There are people in this country that get 2 and 3 cars. Every 2-3 years, duty-free vehicles. The duty-free, when last have we had a report the duty-free vehicles are returned? Right? Or the taxes are collected when sold. But that's beside the point. The point I want to make, grassroots, we the grassroots of this country, we must start to demand to see what is it. How big is this gap between those at the top and the rest of us at the bottom?
Maybe we should ask the clerk of the National Assembly to give us some of that information. Let's see if he refuses. Because we do have a problem where people are not prepared to give information despite the requirement of the law. But we come back to this. You have a situation which is clear that even the higher public sector minimum wage is not adequate to carry a family by at least 50%. It's less than, it's not half of what it should get. So if you were to think about it, you're probably talking about 175 almost that people need for the other things. I don't think we should give you the impression that we're saying do that right away, but have a wage policy
Yes.
that says, okay, these are the parameters and this is how we intend to reach it. If we're talking about reaching a million barrels of oil per day, why can't we talk about reaching a proper minimum
But Chris,
wage?
I'm glad that you've made mention of that. Do you know that the government of Guyana signed on to what is referred to as a decent work country program? It is a program that was discussed and agreed to by what is referred to the social partners, labor, the private sector, and the government. And one of the pillars or objective of that decent work country program is for the parties to meet and devise a wages and income policy. That is one of the objectives, apart from social dialogue and tripartism and so on, social protection and so on.
Shouldn't we be advocating? We not good. Even Article 13, I don't think has the capacity to really promote it, but it can certainly advocate it. Shouldn't we be advocating for a national policy,
Yes.
national wage policy? How can you run a country? We really lack policies. And you know, if you think about it, politician and policy, they have the same root. Linguistically, they have the same root.
Correct.
But politicians don't care about policies. They care about experience.
Well, Chris, the other dichotomy that I see here, the other challenge probably I should word it as, that I see here is that the government has boasted of its civil groupings, that it always tried to seek their opinion. And so I would want to think that the Private Sector Commission and groups like Private Sector Commission and the Chamber of Commerces and so forth, they should have a ready report of what their own members are paying. And that should be readily available to guide the government and guide the Ministry of Labor in its work. In other words, if this is your baby, your favorite, what you call it, group that you go to for advice, then let the group man up and also provide what are the private sector wages across their own membership.
But you know that's being a little bit unrealistic. All they care for is to advocate for measures that will enhance their bottom line.
Good, and therein lies where I'm coming. You see, the thing is, government should say, okay, Mr. Private Sector, you want to advocate for better tax rates, you want to advocate for better, what you call it, the wharf, concessions and rates there and so forth. what are you doing for the people working with you? Because here is the last report you submitted about the average wage of private sector wages, workers. So government could readily say, okay, I'm going to incentivize you and let me see this go up.
You can see the private sector commission. You must have dealt with them. You can see them following a pattern that
I
Yogi is talking about.
I don't see that, because if the private sector, if they were to be true to themselves, I think one of the things that, before we get to even the point that Yogi is talking about, the private sector obviously ought to be aware that the government has been violating conventions,
that governments,
the governments, right, and their succeeding administration have been violating the law and conventions as it relates to the whole question of collective bargaining. Right? And I think that the private sector that worth its salt, because the unions have been making this point from time to time. Why it is that the private sector cannot engage the government and say, look, what you are doing is in contravention of law, agreements, conventions, and so on, and discontinue that. Why can't the private sector? Because in the final analysis, it is in the interest of the private sector to do that, right? Because if at some point in time the situation becomes so chaotic that the unions were to mobilize and take industrial action to restore the collective bargaining process, the economy is going to suffer. The private sector invariably is going to suffer too. So it is in their own interest to ensure that these conventions and laws are adhered to.
do we have such enlightened employers in Guyana who see not the short-term bottom line, but who look to the long-term, more enlightened type of human resource policy? So it's a company that cares not only for its shareholders, but it cares for its stakeholders. Do we see that happening, Yo?
Yes, I would say there is, albeit small, but there is a percentage of private businesses that do pay their workers well, and they also provide study benefits and schemes that would enhance workers. Because, Chris, at the bottom line, when you study industrial relations, you study employment, all of those things, you know that when you empower your employees as a private businessman, you are keeping them. You're training them, but you're keeping them, because the cost of turnover is also great, right?
Indeed.
And that's another negative effect. We keep talking about Guyana's brain drain, but the truth is we don't have the wage to sustain keeping people.
Yeah.
You spoke about the social enhancement, social infrastructure. It's absent. And all of this comes back to one thing. We need to ensure as a country we can quickly evaluate wages with a pragmatic view of increasing them, and set such schemes in place that can evaluate what's happening on the world stage, impact on our cost of living, and what to do about it.
Now, thank you. The light is on, so that means that the program is coming to a close. How do you were part of, so was Article 13, of advocating on this Ukrainian invasion, in the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Do we see some more robust action by the unions to lift wage levels, to give them a reasonable standard of living? Can you persuade your own colleagues in the labor movement? And we've got to be very brief.
Yes. Well, I am in the process. As a matter of fact, I've already started the process of preparing some letters to be dispatched to my colleagues across the board, whether they are FETOG or whether they are TUC. I consider all of us trade unionists, and hoping to engender some national discourse in terms of what we do going forward to address the question of a decent minimum wage for all the workers in Guyana.
Yoga, I'll give you the final say.
Thank you, Chris. I want to just call on workers and people of this country that sometimes we all got to look at what's happening. And, you know, we can all we can all advocate for better conditions, better wages, and keep on reminding your union leaders and your politicians, you are the ones that matter and matter the most.
Dr. Yog Mahalio, Mr. Norris Witter, thank you very much for playing talk this evening on the question of the minimum wage, the atrocious minimum wage, particularly in the private sector, and the disparity with the cost of living. I really appreciate your insights, and we should have this kind of discussion more often on policy issues. We should talk about civil society and its role, what we can do to make it better, how we can help to formulate policies, how we can contribute to the national discussion, which unfortunately the political parties do not seem to want to encourage. On that note, I want to say thank you once again, operators and viewers. Thank you, good night, and I'll see you next week.
We fought for our freedom, and for this we must stand strong. People rise up, oh lad, it's time to stand up and fight. No more oppressing with the Most High blessings. We're stronger together, united. Black